What's up, y'all? Here we are in our book study. We are reading 4,000 Weeks, Time Managed for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. We are looking at pathological productivity, the freedom to suck at things, and we're reading Rediscovering Rest, which is something I was literally talking to my wife about this morning, about how hard it can be to rest. And the main reason here is because we live in a culture now where everything is seen as a means to an end. We live in an age and a culture of instrumentalism that really only values things based upon what they give us. It's not looking at things as valuable in themselves, but just what am I going to get out of it? And so Bergman really does a great job in this chapter of pointing to how some of the things that we can see as really rigid rules in prior traditions and current religious traditions, the Sabbath, they point to how hard it is to rest. They point to this recognition that rest is not simply not doing anything. There's actually effort and intention that we have to take in order to actually experience rest. So we will get started here on, we're reading Rediscovering Rest, chapter 9, pages 141, 160 here in our book study. And one of the things that I really like that I actually want to start out with here is the last chapter, or is the last section. And he's talking about the freedom to suck at something. That one of the core attributes, the core qualities of leisure is that we do things, the things that we do for leisure are things that we do because they're worth doing. Things that we do, even that it doesn't matter if we suck at them. We're not trying to get something out of them. We're not trying to turn anything. Leisure enjoyed for its own sake. A difficulty in our instrumental culture is we're viewing everything as a means to an end, and so even leisure we can look at, what am I getting out of it? But he says that's one of the questions that, well, as I was reading, I realized that's one of the questions that we can ask ourselves. And so I would love to hear from you, what are the things in your life that you have the freedom to suck at? The things that are worth doing just because you love them. The things that are worth doing even if you never improved, even if you never got better. And as we're going through this chapter 2, I want to invite you to think about here all the things that you're doing for the sake of something else. This trap in instrumentalism where we kind of have come to only see the world as a means to an end, and missing that life itself, to be able to be here and live. This is an end in of itself. And so one of the things that he talks about here is the decline of pleasure. That we've lost pleasure because we start to experience this pressure to use even our leisure time well. We feel like enjoying leisure for its own sake, enjoying life for its own sake, that feels, it brings up some kind of guilt. And I think this is absolutely so true in the wellness world, in the healing world. It's kind of a strange paradox that one of the things that we want to learn how to do is just to exist. And there's things that we hear like, go on a walk, right? Art, relationships, expression, being in nature. And the issue is that when we always plug these things into trying to get something out of them, we actually miss the whole point, which is not to get something out of them, but rather to just be with them, to be in them. And so I really want to invite you to think about that in your life right now. Think about the leisure activities that you have. Think about the things that you like doing. Think about things that maybe you got into, but then started to see what you could get out of it. This is something that was actually really fascinating to me in this whole journey of being on social media. When I started last May, I just started because I was like, I'll just share my thoughts. And it was really fun. It felt like a hobby, something that I wasn't doing it for the sake of some output. I was just doing it for its own sake. And then in this classic experience in our culture, right? It's like I was doing it and I was good at it. And so immediately it was like, oh, what can I get out of it? Oh, well, maybe it's something that I can do to support my family. Oh, maybe it's something that I can do to make an income. Oh, maybe it's something that I can do. And so all of a sudden, something that I began doing strictly because I just enjoyed it, because it was enjoyable and I liked kind of just expressing myself. It became this thing again that was something to extract. And so even now I'm learning to kind of write that relationship, to go back to doing this as something that I just love. Because when we turn something that's a love into something that we're trying to get something out of, it can so quickly zap it of its passion. And he says, even, when we look at something like traveling, even an undertaking as hedonistic as a year spent backpacking around the globe could fall victim to the same pattern. If your purpose isn't to just explore the world, but rather a subtle distinction, if it's to add more to your mental storehouse of experiences in the hope that you'll feel better about yourself and feel like you've accomplished something, then you're doing the same thing. You're just trying to use the whole of your experience as the means to some end. And here on 143, he says, the regrettable consequence of justifying leisure only in terms of its usefulness for other things is that even rest begins to feel like a chore. As Walter Kerr says, and he said in 1962, we are all of us compelled to read for profit, party for context, gamble for charity, go out in the evenings for the greater glory of the municipality, and stay at home on the weekend to rebuild the house. Our culture has this pathological productivity. So much of what we do is about justifying our own existence, either trying to feel meaning and worth in our accomplishments, trying to prove something. And I know certainly for me, of course, earning an income and taking care of my family is the priority. But work then can so easily become a place where I'm trying to feel good about myself. I'm trying to justify my own existence. And it can be also a place to escape from discomfort, ambiguity, relationships, and the challenge in life. And so Bergman anchors us in recognizing that, for the ancient philosophers, they recognized that leisure was really one of the most important things in life. To be able to do things that are worth doing, not because of what they bring about, but things that are worth doing for their own sake. And this is an essential distinction between intrinsic goods and instrumental goods. And I think understanding this distinction is one of the most important things that we can do in order to live a good life. That's what Aristotle thought. Instrumental goods are things that we do for the sake of something else. Instrumental goods are things that we do for what they bring about. Instrumental goods are things that we do because we need some output, right? So I go to work to make money, to take care of the family. I make food so I can feed. We do all these things instrumentally. And we need those things, right? That's part of our life. We're never going to get out of that. Those things aren't bad. But there's another type of good. And if we don't have that other type of good, then we're just going to live as our culture is right now. A cycle of chronic exhaustion from striving. And an experience of a lack of meaning because we're trying to extract everything. We're just pillaging the world. And the other type of good is things that are good, not because of what they bring about, but because their goodness is intrinsic. Human beings, for example. Human beings are good, not because what they bring about, but because it's in their nature. Friendship is one of these things. Going on a walk, right? Berkman talks about going on a walk is the type of activity that's good, not because it helps you to stay in shape, not because it's good to get outside, although those things are true, but just because it's good in and of itself. It's a recognition that there's some things that aren't good because of what they do or bring about, but because of their very nature. And so one of the things that he emphasizes is that it's hard to step out of the work. And part of this in our culture is really the emphasis on production. He says one of the things that we've lost is how much effort it actually takes to stop. And he talks about the Sabbath, rediscovering rest and exploring the Sabbath, because when we're in this constant state of work, as he says on page 147, it becomes difficult to enjoy a moment of rest for itself alone, without any regard for potential future benefits, because rest has no instrumental value, and so in our culture we feel that it's wasteful. But if that's true, and this is where it gets kind of paradoxical, the truth then is that spending at least some of your leisure time wastefully, solely focused on the pleasure of the experience, is the only way to not waste our time. For us to truly be at leisure, rather than kind of sneakily trying to do it to engage, to grow in some way. Even reading, it's so easy for reading to disconnect from the love of learning and instead be about trying to make us a better applicant or trying to make us more attractive. We've lost the love for things just because they're worthy of being lovable. And so in order to have the most fulfilling life, we actually have to refrain from trying to use every spare moment of it. And this is what the Sabbath was about. The Sabbath was about recognizing that there's more to life than pulling out, that there's actually just something about resting and receiving, that in our culture that says you have to extract something from every moment, then life itself becomes endlessly exhausting. And so he talks about how one of the contributors to this cycle was this idea of the Calvinist predestination. And I'm not going to go too far in that right now because it's something that honestly is outside of my knowledge. But he talks about that when we have this idea that we have to prove our worth, we have to stock up how good we are as people, then that fear, it never ends. We have to grow more and more and more and more to kind of try to prove that we're good people. And so he says here, to rest for the sake of rest, to enjoy a lazy hour for its own sake, entails first accepting the fact that this is it. That your days aren't progressing towards a future state of perfectly invulnerable happiness. And that to approach your days with that attitude is to drain them and drain your 4,000 weeks of life of all of their value. And so he brings us to reflect on rules for rest. He says it was the members of religious communities who first saw a crucial fact about rest, which is that it isn't simply what occurs by default when you take a break from your work. That it actually takes effort. It takes work. He talks about, maybe for some people it might be easy to look at the idea that, you can't go to the store or can't do activities, you can't operate an elevator. It might be easy to look at that as an absurdity. He says, such rules strike many of people who aren't in these religions as absurd. But if these rules are absurd, it's an absurdity that's well tailored to an equally absurd reality about humans, which is that we as humans need these sort of pressures in order to get ourselves to rest. He quotes the author Judith Schultzovitz here. And Judith says, most people believe that all you have to do to stop working is not work. The inventors of the Sabbath understood that it is much more complicated undertaking. You can't downshift casually and easily the way you might slip into bed at the end of a long day. As the Cat in the Hat says, it's fun to have fun, but you have to know how. And this is why the Puritan and Jewish Sabbaths were so exacting and intentional. They required extensive advanced preparation. At the very least, you had to have a scrubbed house, a full larder, and a bath. The rules for the Sabbath didn't exist to torture the faithful. They were meant to communicate the insight that interrupting the ceaseless round of striving requires a surprisingly strenuous act of the will, one that has to be bolstered by habit as well as social sanction. It's so easy to work nonstop. And I feel this in my own life. And something that struck me from the beginning of reading this book from Berkman is that he says, like, if you wait till everything gets done to do the important things, you'll never do the important things, because everything is never going to get done. There's always an unending to-do list. There's always things that need to be taken care of. There's always things that need to be accomplished. But what we can choose instead is to say, I'm going to start doing the things that matter, not waiting for the time to open up. And this is one of the things, I love this quote here on 153. He says, and since the dawn of capitalism, taking rest on the Sabbath has been radical in a second way. While capitalism gets its energy from the permanent anxiety of striving for more, the Sabbath embodies the thought that whatever work you've completed by the time that Friday or Saturday night rolls around might be enough, that there might be no sense for now in trying to get more done. In his book, Sabbath as Resistance, the Christian theologian Walter Brueggemann describes the Sabbath as an invitation to spend 1 day per week in the awareness and practice of the claim that we are situated on the receiving end of the gifts of God. Berkman says one need not be a religious believer to feel some deep relief in the idea of being on the receiving end, in the possibility that today, at least, there might be nothing more you need to do than to justify your existence. At the same time, it's surely never been harder to make the required psychological shift than it is today. To pause in your work for long enough to enter the coherent, harmonious, somehow thicker experience of time that comes with being on the receiving end. It's hard to step into that feeling, step out of the clock and step into deep time rather than constantly trying to control and master it. And the social pressures, which used to tell us that we couldn't do anything on Sunday, right? All the stores were shut down. Now they're reversed. All the shops are open. All the work is at your fingertips. It's so easy to continue to toil and toil and toil. And so one of the important things he says here is that an important thing to do as individuals, if we want to find more rest, is to stop expecting it to feel good. That when we are living in this world of pathological productivity, it's not going to feel good at first to slow down. And a lot of times it doesn't feel good because this need to accomplish is a part of us that's protecting us from feelings of vulnerability, feelings like we don't matter, feelings like we don't have any worth. And so we can get caught up. Part of us, these manager parts, step into these defensive roles of trying to prove ourselves to the world, trying to prove ourselves to our family, trying to prove ourselves to ourselves. And so as long as we are trying to escape feelings by success, we are going to be running in a never-ending cycle. As long as I'm trying to escape my feeling that I might not be good enough as a human being by being productive, I'm going to keep working and working and working and working. And when we don't have these hard rules for when to work and when to stop, it's just going to drive us into this chronic burnout, this chronic exhaustion, this chronic tiredness. And so this is where it's so important for us to have practices in our lives on a daily basis that aren't about what they produce, that are just about doing them because they're good to do, period, full stop. Because the rest doesn't happen by default. It happens by intention and practice and action. And this is one of the reasons why I have such a commitment to my morning routine. My morning routine, I wake up at 5 a.m. every day and do it on the weekends. I move my body for 30 minutes. I do yoga, right? I'm connecting with my body. I'm taking care of my body. Why? Because my body is worth taking care of. Because it's good to move my body. It's good to connect with my being. And then, after showering, I meditate for 30 minutes. And that practice of meditation is about practicing being on the receiving end of experience, being on the receiving end of life. Because when we meditate, what we're doing is we're simply sitting and noticing. And one of the things that we notice is that we're existing outside of ourselves. We're existing not because we are being forced into something. We're existing not because we choose to exist. We are existing because we're being carried on forward by powers outside of ourselves. And so for me, the practice of mindfulness is the practice of experiencing the awareness which is beyond me and which empowers me. About being on the receiving end of experience. Not about doing, but about being. And the next thing I do is I pray and I journal. I take time to journal and to write to God. And there what I do is I just tell him my worries, I tell him my woes, I tell him my exhaustions, I tell him what I'm scared of. And he teaches me how to meet those difficulties with kindness and compassion. Again, it's a place where I'm learning to let go of control and practicing to be on the receiving end of life itself. I didn't bring myself into this world. My life is beyond me, but I can consciously cultivate the recognition of my life. And that's why for me, my morning routine is really important. It's not to optimize my life. It's actually because I realize there will never be a time to optimize my life. So damn it, I'm going to do the things that are important to me every day. It's important to me to move my body, to honor my body. It's important for me to practice receiving existence, to remember that I'm not in control. It's important to me to connect with the beauty and the love that is at the center of reality. These things are worth doing, not because of what they bring about, but because they are good to do. And so that's why every day, that's the way that I begin doing them. And it has changed my life. Because it's not enough to just say, I'm going to try to rest more. I'm going to live my life more intentionally. Right? That's what Berkman's pointing out about the Sabbath. It's so exacting because that's how hard it is to break the cycle of work. No, we need to take intentional actions. In as much as we can be obsessed with productivity and getting more things out of life, That's the kind of intention that's taken to actually do less. And so again, one of the things he talks about here is hiking as an end in of itself. Hiking is a perfect example. He says, I just go on a country walk. He says, for one thing, unlike almost everything else I do in my life, it's not relevant to ask whether I'm any good at it. All I'm doing is walking. A skill at which I haven't appreciably improved since around the age of 4. Moreover, a country walk doesn't have a purpose in the sense of an outcome that you're trying to achieve. Rather, it's something that's being done for itself. And here he talks about telos, and telos means end. The end is what we're striving for. Again, there are things that we do that are teleological. We're doing them for the sake of something else. And then we're also able to do things that aren't done because of what they bring about, but because they're worth doing. Things like going on a walk, things like expression, things like speaking, things like friendship. He says you can stop doing these things, and eventually you will. These things that are worth doing just because they're worth doing. But you can't complete them. Setya explains, these things have no outcome whose achievement exhausts them and therefore brings them to an end. And so the only reason to do them is for themselves alone. There is no more to going for a walk than what you're doing right now. There's no getting better at going for a walk. There's no time when walking doesn't matter anymore. It's something that's worth doing for its own sake. We can get caught in this cycle of a project-driven life where it's just crammed with doing this for the sake of this. Go to school, go to grade school to get into high school. Do good in high school so you can get into college. Get a good job in college so you can support yourself. Get a family so you can have something to support, right? Like, it's just this endless going. And then we get to a point where our lives can feel meaningless, because when your relationship with time is almost entirely instrumental, this present moment starts to lose its meaning. But mortality makes it impossible to ignore the absurdity of living solely for the future. And so Carl Jung talks about the midlife crisis, because he says the first half of our lives are focused externally. They're focused on learning. They're focused on developing economic security. They're focused on building relationships. Our focus is external. But what happens in the midlife crisis is oftentimes we can get to a place where we have that security. And then what? And Carl Jung says that at that point, our task in the midlife crisis, our task is, once we have the security on the outside, is to turn inward, is to make the spiritual journey, the journey of the interior world, of meaning, of exploring our fears, of finding out, well, if life isn't about producing things, what does it mean to live a meaningful life? And so again, this brings us to this last point, which is that our leisure is about pursuing activities for which we have no hope of becoming exceptional. And in that, taking the courage to set aside the temptation and the pressure to use time well. And he talks here about the publisher and editor Karen Rinaldi. She said she loves surfing even though she's not very good at it. It took her 5 years to catch her first wave. She admits that she's appalling at surfing even to this day. It took her 5 years to attempt to catch a wave before she first managed to do so. But, she says, in the process of trying to attain a few moments of bliss in surfing, I experienced something else. Patience and humility, definitely. But also freedom. Freedom to pursue the futile. And freedom to suck without caring, which is revolutionary. Freedom to suck without caring is revolutionary. And so I really want to ask you to think about this now. And we'll open it up for some questions here. So if you If you have questions or comments or reflections, or if you've asked a question, ask again here in the comments. You can comment book study if you want to join our book study. Are there things in your life that you would do if you had the permission to suck at them? Are there things in your life that if you didn't have to measure yourself, you would love to do? Are there things in your life that you do even though you suck because you just enjoy them? What are the areas where you actually allow yourself to not be measured, but rather to experience your life, to experience reality? I'd love to hear about it. For me, rest is something really important. And I'm learning that because I'm learning that from my children. My children are teaching me all the ways that I'm not good at resting. Because it can be hard for me to step back from something that feels like important, like a work project, to go roll on the ground with my kids, roll around on the ground with my kids. But I'm seeing how important that is, how important it is to be present to them, to actually be here, to let go of my belief that I need to prove myself and actually embrace their life. Because when I do that, what I'm teaching them is that life is not all about outputs. It's about being connected with what's important. Relationships are important to me. The present moment's important to me. So it's something that's a practice that I'm leaning into it. So I would love to hear about the areas in your life where you feel like you feel stuck. You feel like you're kind of captive by that productivity. You're captive by the need to produce something. I'd love to see it here in the comment section. If you want to join the book study, comment book study, and I'll add you to the email list. What would I recommend for someone who is in the hustle culture, like corporates? You know, I think the first thing is reflection. And we just need to ask, is this the life that we want to live? We need to ask, what's our why, right? Why am I doing this? And a good question might be, if I didn't have to prove myself, how would I change my life? If I didn't have to earn, if I didn't have to prove, if I didn't have to justify my own existence, how would I live differently? When we're caught up in the whole hustle culture, a great technique is called the downward arrow technique. And the downward arrow technique is we just ask kind of why repeatedly, or what would happen if I didn't have to do that. So I feel like I have to justify my existence. Okay. How do you feel like you have to justify my existence? Okay. Well, I feel like I have to make a lot of money. Okay. And what will happen if you make a lot of money? Okay. Then I'll have security. And what would happen if you had security? Okay. Well, if I had security, then I wouldn't be so scared all the time. I could just relax. Oh, okay. So here's where we recognize there's a desire to not feel afraid. So this hustle culture is actually a protection from fear. We can ask why, right? I feel like I need to be the hardest worker in the room. Why? Well, because if I'm not the hardest worker in the room, then what do I have to have worth in myself? Because maybe I'm not very good at doing things, but if I can be good at working hard, well, then I can feel like I'm worthy. Oh, okay, so there's this feeling of needing to justify my existence. In the downward arrow technique, and this is really helpful when you're writing, you just explore why. Not like, why is this happening, but in a kind of straightforward, more specific way. Oh, thank you so much, my friend. Sending hugs and loves. I'm glad that this feels peaceful for you. Sending much love your way. And Sarah, I'm glad that you are connecting as well. Bert says, I would love to not be the time management person of my friends and family. I don't want to worry about the time 100% of the time. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And this can be difficult, right? Because we can feel like, well, if I don't manage the time, then nobody will, right? We use that downward arrow technique. And a lot of times there, what we find is that there are pressures. And there's a couple different ways we can learn to explore that. But one of the ways that's difficult too is that if we're always the person managing the time, then nobody else has to take on that responsibility. So we, by this kind of like spiral that's grown, have inherited this role of always doing the work of managing time. Yeah, no one remembers where it's written that you can't suck. Yeah. But a lot of us are afraid of sucking. A lot of us feel like we're not allowed to suck. So thank you all for being here. If there's any other last questions or reflections, comment book club. If you want to join the book club, send an email out with this recorded video and some reflections on this wonderful book by Oliver Burkeman, Time Management for Mortals, a book that's changed my life. So thank you all so much for being here. I wish you all the best. I hope you're well. Hope you're enjoying this Friday. And I hope that you can have rest, whether it's this evening, whether it's this weekend. I want to really challenge you to actually take a rest that's challenging to do, to just sit. And remember, if we're used to working all the time, rest is going to feel uncomfortable at first. But that's normal. As we rest, we can learn to explore with curiosity those parts of us that don't want us to rest, learn to turn towards our experience, and learn to find that we can actually change gears. When we work, we need to work. When we rest, we need to rest. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next Friday. Take good care.